how did Sherlock Holmes think? Wasn't he all about deduction and like nothing else? And like, but then does this stuff he does seem like induction? Because like empirical stuff, not okay. Induction versus deduction. Sherlock Holmes, what he did. Um, Deduction, yes, a lot. But where does this come from? What's going on? What was he actually doing? What is induction? What is deduction? So he was immersed in the world. Remember, Sherlock Holmes was in and of the world. The way he did things, the way he functioned. Um, he was a very good boxer. He was physically and mentally fit, like a good Boy Scout, but physically fit, mentally straight, and morally awake, something or other. He had mental and physical prowess, like Abraham Lincoln. Um, More like a Renaissance man, total person. He studied a lot of things, and there's one point. Oh yeah, I forgot to open that up. What Watson found that Sherlock knew and didn't know. He made a list of things. Maybe I just did put a link to that. How Sherlock was probably knew a lot of medicine, some botany. I think didn't know much astronomy. Didn't study some Newton because he didn't think it was useful. Some things like that. I'll find that and put a link in the description field. Watson stuff. Sherlock knew. Note to myself there. So, those are some things to remember about Sherlock, immersed in the world, did all these things. And we got to remember who wrote it. Arthur Conan Doyle. He wasn't a philosopher or a deep logician. Smart, knew some logic, clearly, some things. But Arthur Conan Doyle, the great Wikipedia says 76 to 81, he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh Medical School. During this period, he spent time working in Aston, Sheffield, and Ruton Z-Towns, Shropshire, whatever. Also during this period, he studied practical botany at the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. While studying, Doyle began writing short stories. Unquote. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Quote, Doyle was the doctor on the Greenland whaler Hope of Peterhead in 1880. On 11 July 1880, John Gray's Hope and David Gray's Eclipse met up at the Ira and Leigh Smith. The photographer W.J.A. Grant took a photograph aboard the Ira of Doyle along with Smith, the Gray brothers, and the ship's surgeon, William Neal, who were members of the Smith expedition. Unquote. Quote, after graduating with Bachelor of Medicine and Mastery of Surgery, MBCM, degrees from the University of Edinburgh in 1881, he was ship's surgeon on the SS Mayumba during a voyage to the West African coast. He completed his Doctor of Medicine, MD degree, an advanced degree beyond the basic medical qualification in the UK, with a dissertation on Tabe dorsalis in 1885, unquote, or however you pronounce the Latin. It says it's some like neurological thingy. And so on. So that's some of his background in education. Then he began writing and practicing and stuff. But so he did learn about medicine. I don't know what else he might have studied in getting into writing. or what books are on his bookshelf. That'd be interesting. What reading he did on his own, what background. But then he wrote Sherlock. So, not a philosopher, maybe philosophical a little bit. I don't know. Not a logician. Has some things about the time. Of course, this is after Galileo, Newton, and so on. So, you know, he's writing, what, after 81 done? Let's see, it's like, quote, Doyle struggled to find a publisher. His first work featuring Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, A Study in Scarlet, was written in 3 weeks when he was 27 and was accepted for publication by Ward Lock and Company on 20 November 1886. So there was his first, unquote, there was his first piece. Oh, yeah, quote, Holmes was partially modeled on Doyle's former university teacher, Joseph Bell. In 1892, in a letter to Bell, Doyle wrote, "It is most certainly to you that I owe Sherlock Holmes. Round the center of a deduction and inference and observation, which I have heard you inculcate, I have tried to build up a man." And in his 1924 autobiography, he remarked, "It is no wonder that after the study of such a character, namely Bell, I used and amplified his methods when in later life I tried to build up a scientific detective who solved cases on his own merits and not through the folly of the criminal." Robert Louis Stevenson was able to recognize the strong similarity between Joseph Bell and Sherlock Holmes. "My compliments on your very ingenious and very interesting adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Can this be my old friend Joe Bell?" Other authors sometimes suggest additional influences. For instance, Edgar Allan Poe's character C. Augusta Dupin is mentioned disparagingly by Holmes in A Study in Scarlet. Dr. John Watson owes his surname, but not any other obvious characteristic, to a Portsmouth medical colleague of Doyle's, Dr. James Watson, unquote. So, there's when he wrote, yeah, I forgot about that, the influence there, a university teacher. So, deduction, inference, observation. But what was really going on? Doyle was not a logician. While he was a good thinker, and maybe deep, he was not as deep as other people. But think about the reality. What made Sherlock Holmes successful? It wasn't merely deduction. He didn't, because doing that on its own is a failure. I'll have to put a link to some nonsense that someone did about arguing with Galileo. I've talked about it before. Claiming that there had to be 7 planets because of 7 days in the week, and we have 7 holes in our face, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 2 eyes, a mouth, and so there have to be 7 planets. Insane. Okay, not insane, but stupid. And Immanuel Kant, Descartes tried to do physics deductively, but no one cares because it's a failure. They were out of touch with reality, hence fail. We know Galileo and Newton and some others like that. And we know the Aristotelian kind of work of Kepler, but we don't care about the wacko, weird work of Kepler or the nonsense of Kant or Descartes. And Ptolemy is like shown wrong, and it's only a historical curiosity now. Without perception, observation, reality, deduction is useless. So, while deduction is important in life, we do it a lot. The things that Sherlock Holmes did that made him successful was not some kind of deduction out of context, but observation. He had to be very observant note things, remember things, know what's significant, find important things, know what to pay attention to, what to dismiss. He had to integrate, make connections. By integrate, I mean cognitively integrate, put things together into a whole. W-H-O-L-E. We need a theory. We need a whole case about a crime. He's got to look at observations he makes in a time and place. He's got to reason about things. He's got to bring into play things he already knows. Everything he knows has to be, what the new things have to be processed in terms of that. So he's got to integrate, connect. Build a case, kind of theory build. That's an important thing that he did. Without a big ability to do that, he could not have solved some complex cases like that. One thing that made him was not merely deduction, but his ability to make connections and put things together into one whole integrated unit. Instead of thinking things don't relate, or it's not relevant, or forgetting, being able to put things together into some like part of geometry, a proof. You put them together to make a new proof and build and build and build. Or doing like what Newton did in physics and astronomy. He engaged in a grand synthesis of terrestrial mechanics and celestial astronomy mechanics and saw that they're unified. And Sherlock had to engage in concept formation, know what things were, form good concepts, not ones that are irrelevant or that will throw him off or confuse him. Be real about what is there in the world, what should be classified together, what's essentially the same, what's different. Criminal mind versus innocent mind, police versus others, different types of soil, what's relevant. And induction, he had to engage in induction before he did a lot of the crime. So when he's actually investigating something, he would have to use deduction a lot, things he already learned, concepts and generalizations he already had. You can't deduce unless you have a generalization to use as a deduction we'll talk about. But now I forgot what I was going to say. But you need to bring into play those things. Form concepts, yeah, classify evil people, good people, criminal mind, non-criminal, different soils, classify, form concepts that are relevant, and then, as I say, generalize. He had to, so observation, integration, connection, concept formation, induction, those are the things he did. We might say observation, well, in background. So first, concept formation, induction had to be there in his everything he knows. Then he would use observation, integration, and deduction when he's investigating a crime. And sometimes he might have to, all this stuff's going on, he's investigating, as I was saying, and forgot. But he's got to observe. He's got to bring concepts into play. He already has. He's got to bring generalizations into play. He already has. He might have to form some new concepts or make some new generalizations while he's doing it, do some investigations, form a generalization so we can apply it in this particular case. But that's what's going on. And that's kind of how we do things in life. So it's a good kind of model for that too. But one thing we need to see if we're going to know if he's doing deduction or induction or what the hell is going on. Okay, well, what the hell is induction? What the hell is deduction? Induction is forming generalizations. Deduction is using them. So deduction is parasitic on induction. Deduction is impossible without an induction. You have to observe things, get some general proposition, generalize about all things of a kind, then and only then, when you have the things, you got the material to make a generalization so it's real. Remember, knowledge is an awareness of reality. Without a reality, we're going to have nothing to be awareness of. And we've got to process it according to our type of consciousness, our conceptual consciousness, to do these things that we do. Induction, deduction, concept formation, all this stuff. It's because of the nature of our consciousness that is not subjective, but is lawful and outside of our control and volition. We can choose to do some things, but if we can't choose our nature, our humanity, how we think, how we perceive, how to properly form concepts, we can't determine that and make it real. We can just be true to it or make a mistake or fail to be. You know, we learn from when we're young, people can lie. That's where free will resides. There and only there. In our concept formation and thinking and how we use them. But induction, we're going from particulars, whoops, chemistry books, stopped on my chemistry books. Induction. We go from particulars to generals. Like, for example, all humans are mortal. We form that from particular instances in a broad context. All humans are mortal. We're talking about these things and they have that characteristic. And there's a hell of a lot of context that goes into making this. It's not just people die. There's more to it than that. Make it so it's not so crammed together. All humans are mortal. We have free will, we have volition, so it can go right with this or go wrong with this. So we need rules for seeing what's right. We need logic. People can say, all redheads are hot-tempered. Okay? Fail. Or all of a certain race are a certain characteristic. Fail. All Aryans are superior. Fail. But we can get it right. All planets orbit the sun in elliptical orbits with the sun at one focus. All right triangles in Euclidean space like have sides such that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Things like that. All squares have equal sides, or all ellipses can be derived or made by shining a flashlight at an angle to a circle. There's that relationship. So we got these generalizations, which we get from experience with the context of knowledge. Some things we cannot get, we can't get generalizations directly from experience. It takes a broad context, like people didn't get all lightning is electricity out of nowhere. That took a broad, deep, advanced context of knowledge to figure out. Took a lot of knowledge about science, force, method, math, knowledge of static electricity. Then people could figure it out and know it and understand it and not just speculate. I'm talking about knowledge versus speculation. But all lightning is electricity. So we got these people in a context, a lot of other stuff. We got to know about animals, living things, the world, food, getting hurt, all this other stuff. And then we get this generalization from these. Okay, so it's going up this way. You got the particulars. We do a lot of reasoning and observation, all this stuff, and then we get this. Deduction goes the other way. So here we got particulars and then a generalization. Deduction. You go the other way. You got a generalization and you apply it to a particular thing. So, all humans are mortal. We learn that, and once we learn that, when we come across a new person, we know that they're mortal. Or all dogs are mortal. We come across a new dog, we know they're mortal. You know, when you're young, you don't really know that so much. Sometimes your dog dies, and it's just traumatic. How did that happen? That can happen. Whoa. Then later in life, you know that your dog or cat can die, and when you get a particular one, you know, it can happen to it. Or we learn that from some particulars and some context that forks can be used to eat food. And then after that, we got these things sitting on the table. We're not going to investigate what they are. We don't jump up in fear for our lives or anything, or try to munch on it like it's food ready to go. We use this generalization to apply to a particular fork. We know that this thing we can pick up and chew. Doesn't even take much processing. It becomes automatic, part of our experience, the way we interact with the world. Perception with learning is our experience. Or we see that some planets go in elliptical orbits. We get the data, do the reasoning, all planets go in elliptical orbits, blah, blah, blah. And then if we discover a new planet in our solar system, we know that it's going to go in elliptical orbit with the sun at one focus. We're deducing it. Or once we learn that and we know and understand the Pythagorean theorem, we come to a new right triangle and we know that it's going to apply, so on and so forth. So we got to deal with the reality and complexity of the world. Classify, observe, form concepts, see how things work, get cause-effect relationships, get properties of things, form a generalization, and then we can go on and use those later in life. Through experience, you know, eventually we learn that there are waiters and waitresses at restaurants. So when someone walks up to our table, it's not a friend or someone we already know, or a family member or something. We eventually learn that it's someone who's going to take our order. We got this generalization. And then later in life, we know when we go to some place and someone walks up to our table dressed in a certain way, we know what's going to happen. We have all these generalizations we formed about what they do, how we interact with them, so on and so forth. They're going to take our order. They're going to bring it back, take our order, get the food, bring it, so on and so forth. Then some restaurants can do different things. Some different people that bring the food and all that. But general idea. So in let's see. So let me see. Induction, we go from particular to general. Deduction, general to particular. So notice that is parasitic on that. Without forming generalizations, that's not possible. This is what Galileo and Newton and others and Darwin figured out and put into practice to help make science real and put it on a good foundation. Instead of like some of this nonsense attempt that some people made earlier in history. Takes time to figure some things out. But that, parasitic on that. So, notice that this is in some Sherlock Holmes. Unfortunately, Doyle probably didn't understand this because some of the stuff I'm saying is more recent. I mean, not this in particular, but some of the stuff that's learned about induction has been more recent. How induction relates to concept formation, getting a proper theory of induction, instead of some of the nonsense that's stated about it. Difficult thing to figure out. But some people in philosophy have done some good work, thankfully. Now, Sherlock wrote monographs. And here are some examples. So when he goes out to do a case, he's going to engage in deduction. He sees some ashes, and that allows him to draw certain conclusions about who did what. And notice that without the context and prior observations, it's impossible for the deduction. He brings into play all this life experience, the total of what he knows. To know about the criminal mind, there's a lot of stuff we had to learn from when we were young. If you think about what you had to learn from when you were a baby until now, logically, not just historically or sequentially, but what did you have to build up? You had to start to perceive things. You had to identify what a person was. You start to develop the concept of friend and refine it. You start to learn ideas so you can see good versus evil, right versus wrong. Learn about mental processing, which some people learn to different degrees. Some people never know the word reason, but don't really know what it is, because that takes introspection and reasoning processes versus not. But Sherlock had to have a lot of life experience to know who would be more innocent, the kind of people who are innocent, the kind of people who are criminal minds, know what those are, who they are, know what kind of things people can do for crime, weapons and all that. There was, a lot. If you stop and think about a case and ask yourself, what did he have to know to do this? What did he learn from when he was a kid till then? Then you see the complexity of what he's bringing into play excuse me, when he's doing these cases. A lot going on. It's just not simple, mindless deduction. But he has to be immersed in the world, observe things, apply his deductions. And he did, because we look at some things that Doyle wrote about what Sherlock did. I wish this would have been more emphasized. But again, the nature of induction, things like that, wasn't as well known. I wish Doyle would have known more about Galileo, Newton, the history of science would have helped. But in bakerstreet.fandom.com, monographs written by Sherlock Holmes. They have a few here. And it says, quote, "The following is a list of the more notable monographs written by Sherlock Holmes," unquote. So, quote, "Upon the distinction between the ashes of the various tobaccos," which was a little monograph on the ashes of 140 different varieties of pipe, cigar, and cigarette tobacco, with colored plates illustrating the difference in the ash, unquote. And they say, it's from A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of Four, Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, the Boscombe Valley Mystery. There's some places where it's mentioned. So notice, he investigated. He knew, Sherlock, that ashes could help him solve crimes, so he studied them extensively. He induced, he formed concepts. He had to engage in a scientific investigation. This wasn't a bunch of deduction out of nowhere. He observed, differentiated, found similarities, found generalizations, this type of cigar produces this type of ash. This type of cigar produces ash with this color, all this stuff. Whatever he did in them, I don't know. But there's 140 ashes from pipe, cigar, cigarette that he would classify, find similarities between, find differences between. All of them are like this. All of them are like this. All A are B. All X are Y. And then he would have those generalizations which he could apply in a particular instance. You'd observe something and you apply that generalization to that concrete ash in some case. And then with connections, with integration, connect, he could see, okay, for a pipe, for an ash, where does the ash come from? What does it cost? Who tends to get it? There'd be these other generalizations that he'd have. Or, quote, a monograph upon the tracing of footsteps with some remarks upon the uses of plaster of Paris as a preserver of impresses, unquote. That's from the Sign of Four. Quote, a curious little work upon the influence of a trade upon the form of the hand with lithotypes of the hands of slaters, sailors, cork cutters, compositors, weavers, and diamond polishers, unquote, from the Sign of Four. Quote, a little monograph on the subject of the dating of documents, unquote, Hound of the Baskervilles. Quote, a trifling monograph upon the subject of all forms of secret writings, analyzing 160 separate ciphers, unquote. The Return of Sherlock Holmes, The Adventures of the Dancing Men. Quote, 2 short monographs appearing in the Anthropological Journal upon the subject of the human ear, unquote, from his last bow, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. Quote, a monograph of the polyphonic motets of Lassus, unquote, from his last bow, The Adventure of Bruce Parlington Plans, whatever. Or in this thing, I shall link to in the Internet Archive, an actual, from the complete Sherlock Holmes, some things here. Let me see. Yeah, here, a monograph, a special study of cigar ashes. It says, quote, Sherlock speaking, quote, in fact, I have written a monograph upon the subject. I flatter myself that I can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand, either of cigar or of tobacco. It is just in such details that the skilled detective differs from the Gregson and Lestrade type, unquote. Yeah, monograph upon the tracing of footsteps, page N89, the other was N31. A monograph upon the deep sea fishes. Someone else had written that. Oh no, so that's just a monograph he found on a shelf, not one he wrote. And here, page N193, quote, I think of writing another little monograph some of these days on the typewriter in its relation to crime, unquote. So there are some examples, and you get the idea of the breadth, variety of things he looked at to deal with crimes. He looked at particulars and formed generalizations, or like he does sometimes, where he knows where someone was based on the soil on left from a chute. How do you do that? You can't do it without observing and being immersed in reality and seeing what's going on. You go around London. You got to immerse yourself in the world, like Newton and Galileo and Darwin and Marie Curie. You got to look at particular things. Look at soils in different parts of London. Observe their characteristics. Form generalizations. Form concepts. They have to be conceptual. Then you can apply these things to a certain particular. In a case, some color, some texture of soil, sandy, clayey, whatever. He finds somewhere to know what it is and to know about it. He's got generalizations that connect this to other things. You have all these classifications and cross connections and causes. Who works there? Who tends to go to that region? Then they'd get that kind of thing on their shoe. Then they'd leave it somewhere. So they'd been there, and then you can track them. Things like that. So that helps you see a little bit better about induction versus deduction and what Sherlock Holmes was doing. He would engage in deduction a lot, but it required having done induction in the first place. This in concept formation, in the total context of knowledge, what he's learned about people, that's the fundamental thing that allowed Sherlock to be successful. His ability to observe, to start to pay attention to things and note them and really identify what's going on. That takes practice, and you can do that. Like I heard that some professor at some university would have his grad students go to a table and look at something and write down everything they knew about it, everything they could observe, and what they'd come back with like 5 or 10 things and think they had done a lot. I observed so much. And he'd say, that's worthless, that's nothing. Like, don't waste my time, go back there, don't come back until you have 100 things. So they'd have to learn really to be observant. Or that's like what Richard Feynman learned when he was young from his dad. You've got to look at the bird. You got to listen to the bird. You got to understand why it does what it does. You got to observe everything. Everything. Be very observant. So you got to observe, take note, or like one study I heard, in a book by Tom Brown Jr., a well-known tracker and survivalist. As he said, he learned from someone who he called grandfather, a Native American, Apache, I think. The guy taught Tom Brown a lot about tracking. It's interesting. One time, grandfather brought Tom Brown Jr. on a trail and then asked, what did you observe? And at that point, he had been working with grandfather and working with him for a while, and he was proud of himself to be able to talk for half an hour on everything he observed on that trail, animal tracks and things like that. And then he says, grandfather, what did you observe? Then they spent the next 3 days. Grandfather took 3 days to tell everything he had observed on that trail about what happened then, what happened before, about the weather, everything that had been there and why. Now that is observation with experience. It takes a lot of observation, a lot of mental processing, a lot of learning, a lot is to go on upstairs through life before you get there. But that's what's possible. That is amazing. That'd be more like what Sherlock would do. Okay, so observation. And then we need concept formation and classification. We got to have things. We got to have this experience we bring into play. Then we got to form generalizations. We got to have the ability to observe in a case, to be successful at it. That's what Sherlock had to do. Then we can apply that to other areas we do, whatever it may be. Finance, running a target, being a cashier, being a police officer, doing physics, doing chemistry, being a teacher, whatever. We should try to be very observant, like Maria Montessori was. As she said, a teacher should be like a scientist and an angel. But Sherlock had to observe. We can learn from that and apply it to other areas, whatever we want to focus on. Immerse oneself in the field, be very observant, learn to make connections, to be like the grandfather who could walk through something, like take a 5 or 10 minute walk, and then spend 3 days describing everything you observed there, what you processed. And that requires having done some concept formation. know concepts like on the trail. White-tailed deer, bobcat, coyote, squirrel, elm, oak, inland sea oats, common box turtle, three-toed box turtle, barred owl, all these things and more. Cloud, rain, soil. A lot of concepts we got to have and generalizations about them. As Sherlock got to do a lot. So we got to get this background stuff. Then we can practice connecting into a big picture. It's too bad Doyle didn't get that so much, because Sherlock thought studying like astronomy or Newton stuff was a waste of his time, but it wouldn't, because it would help him learn to form a theory and put a lot of evidence into a big picture. If he would have known how it really developed from ancient times to now, as you can see in like a link I can put to, like Michael Fowler, UVA, he describes a little bit how you go from ancient astronomy through Newton to get the grand synthesis of universal gravitation, or in Physics for the Inquiring Mind by Eric Rogers. Most of it, nah, but a section about astronomy, really good. A lot of detail about everything people had to learn, observations, evidence, math, reasoning, all this stuff that had to be put together to make universal gravitation that Newton did. Lincoln did that, learned, he did study something to help him learn to integrate better. To become a better lawyer, a better thinker, he memorized Euclid's elements, looked at all of geometry to make himself a better thinker. And that helped Abraham Lincoln be successful in law, in politics, in thinking and writing. Thinking fundamentally, becoming a better reasoner. He could do better in law, politics, writing, reading, speaking. But it helped him be good, like in law, because you could tell you got to get evidence, identify what's real, what's not, what's true, get testimony, hearsay versus opinion versus nonsense versus lies, talk to people, bring into play prior precedents, know law, all this stuff to bring together to make one case. What Lincoln got out of studying Euclid's elements, Sherlock could have got out of studying like the history of what Newton did, but I'm not sure how much was available. Yeah, it should have been all available at that time. But because Newton knew it. So it actually could help, but connection, integration, that was very important to what Sherlock did also. So it's not just deduction. He is very good at deduction, but the things he had to do to make deduction useful, otherwise it would have been a total failure and useless. He had to be good at observation. He had to be immersed in this world and take this real. He had to have concept formation down, formed a lot of good concepts that are relevant to what he wants to do, have formed generalizations that he's going to apply in deduction. He's got to know about cause-effect relationships and how to integrate, connect. So there is an analysis of Sherlock Holmes and his thinking. It's more than just deduction. So let's please get this. We can apply this to what we do, different areas, to digging into physics, doing it as a good science, knowing how to really do this well, how to teach. How do you teach any subject? This will help. And then what do we want to train students to do? This stuff we've discussed is our ideas in theory we can use to try to think about what an ideal student should be in their own lives, able to be as Sherlock was in whatever way they are, whether it's as a cashier, someone who works at McDonald's all their lives, someone who works at Walmart, or someone who works as a groundbreaking 10-time Nobel Prize winning scientist or something. It's still the same thing we should try to get them to be. Someone who can do this morally as well, knowing how to dig in and live the good life and be honest and be real, be true to reality and committed to their friends. Who are their friends? You know, they should, if they can think like this, they know better who their friends are, who their loved ones are, how to help them. That's very important. That will give them more life satisfaction. Who they are themselves, what they want to do in life. They can be like Sherlock and figure that out. So these kind of skills are at the root of stuff, just like becoming a better reasoner was at the root of all Abraham Lincoln did. And look how much better it made our country. Thankfully, we improved in some important ways because of what he did. But we can get this stuff, use it as hypothesis, as theory, ideas, model for kind of how to help our students, no matter what they want to do. So if you have any questions, let me know. Hope this was useful. So now we got a better idea of Sherlock Holmes, induction, deduction, how thinking works. Peace.